September 15, 1940. The Prime Minister's residence in Tokyo. Cigarette smoke hung thick as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto crushed out his third lucky strike. The American brand was an irony no one missed. Prime Minister Prince Fumimaro Konoe asked without ceremony, skipping the usual polite wording, "If we fight the United States, what are our chances?" Yamamoto's reply would shadow Japan to the end. "If ordered to wage war whatever the cost, I can run wild for 6 months to a year, but I have no faith in the second or third year." The officers shifted in their chairs. Here was the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, the man who would have to lead that war, saying out loud that Japan would lose before it started. Yamamoto wasn't guessing. He had seen American industry close up, walked factory floors, studied oil production, and reduced output to numbers and rates. The arithmetic of destruction had been done years earlier in Harvard lecture halls, confirmed in Pennsylvania steel plants, and checked again among Texas oil derricks. He knew what others refused to admit. Any war with America was lost at the start. Only the clock mattered, 6 months. He could hand them a string of early wins before the giant woke up. Isoroku Takano was born April 4, 1884, in Nagaoka, Niigata Prefecture, the 6th son of a poor school teacher. His father was 56 at the time, so the name Isoroku 56 stuck. The family was painfully poor. They often lived on sweet potatoes and barley without money for rice. That hardship later sharpened Yamamoto's eye for America's abundance. In 1916, the young officer was adopted into the Yamamoto family, a common way to climb in Japanese society. He had already lost 2 fingers on his left hand at Tsushima in 1905, where he watched Japan smash Russia's Baltic fleet. Many took from that victory the dangerous lesson that spirit could beat material strength. Yamamoto spent the rest of his life arguing the opposite. He understood why Russia lost. It fought a distant war while wrestling a revolution at home. America would have none of those limits. To grasp this fully, he had to see the United States himself. That chance came in 1919 when, at 35, he received orders that changed his life and history, report to Harvard for English, and to observe U.S. naval progress. What followed turned a loyal Japanese admiral into a Cassandra whose warnings went unheeded. April 1919, he arrived at Harvard in uniform, 2 swords at his side, a curious sight among the ivy. He enrolled as a special student to study English. The record later showed a lukewarm C+, but that grade hid the real lesson. Living simply in Brookline, Massachusetts, he kept an obsessive routine, 3 to 4 hours of sleep, then reading industry reports, oil statistics, aviation journals, maps of oil fields and stacks of manufacturing data filled his room. He decided the future ran on oil. While some 70 other Japanese students took regular classes, Yamamoto haunted Widener Library, digging into petroleum geology and refining. He learned the U.S. pumped about 65% of the world's oil, 378 million barrels. In 1919, Japan imported nearly all of its fuel, mostly from the U.S. itself. But the biggest lessons came during summer breaks, when he vanished for weeks, hitchhiking across the country on a few dollars. One early trip took him to Texas oil fields. For 3 weeks, he watched, drilling and refining up close. He lived on bread, bananas, and water, sleeping outdoors, saving every coin for more time on site. In the summer of 1920, he stood outside Ford's Highland Park plant in Detroit as 20,000 workers poured out at shift change. many heading to their own cars. In Japan, even officers rarely owned automobiles. He had hitchhiked 900 miles to witness what Henry Ford called the liberation of the common man. Inside, posing as a visiting engineering student, he toured the assembly line that remade manufacturing. A Model T came off the line every 45 seconds. Each worker repeated one precise task. From raw steel to finished car took 93 minutes. In a week there, he filled 3 notebooks. He estimated Ford employed more industrial labor than the entire Japanese Navy. Ford's daily steel use exceeded Japan's weekly output. And this was one company, in one city, in one sector. The Americans have made manufacturing into science, he wrote his mentor Admiral Tomosaburo. They build machines the way we grow rice, methodically, efficiently, at scales that defy belief. Specialists for each step, everything measured, improvements applied at once. No waste, no delay. The numbers were brutal. U.S. car output rose from 485,000 in 1915 to 2.3 million in 1920. Americans already owned 1 car per 13 people. In Japan, it was 1 per 5,000. He also saw what those numbers meant for war. Lines that built Model Ts could build trucks, tank parts, and engines. Skilled hands that made precise housings could make gun breeches and aircraft components. Supply chains that fed Detroit could feed an army front. Before graduating, he disappeared again. Texas, summer 1921. For 6 weeks, he traced what he called fountains of power. Oil in East Texas. He hopped freight trains and walked to Spindletop near Beaumont, birthplace of the modern oil boom. Output had declined since 1901, but the field still pumped thousands of barrels a day. He quizzed roughnecks and engineers about bit types, flow rates, and refining yields. The scale stunned him. Single wells produced more in a day than Japan imported in a week. At Texaco's Port Arthur refinery, he sketched the layout. It ran 100,000 barrels a day, powered by electricity, with automatic pumps and lights 24 hours a day. "Oil is the blood of modern war," he wrote. "Ships, planes, tanks, trucks, everything runs on it. America has oceans of it. Japan has none. That one fact decides everything." He moved north to Kilgore and Longview as new fields came online. Derricks rose so thick a man could walk from one to the next without touching the ground. Natural gas flared off as waste, lighting the night for miles. The waste shook him most. Japan hoarded imported fuel by the barrel. Americans burned enough gas each day to power Tokyo for a month. That casual abundance convinced him more than any parade that America could not be beaten. In January 1926, now a captain, he returned as naval attaché in Washington through March 1928. The visit confirmed his fears. With money and status, he traveled widely and took official tours. First, he refreshed his numbers. U.S. car production was heading toward 4.3 million in 1926. Steel reached 48 million tons. Oil rose beyond 770 million barrels. Not just growth, acceleration. His routine was fixed. Monday to Wednesday at the embassy. Thursday to Sunday on the road. He followed 3 threads: production capacity, raw materials, and new technology. At Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania, he watched armor plate poured in electric furnaces that did in hours what Japanese shops needed weeks to attempt. The works employed 30,000 and drew more power than Kyoto. In Birmingham, Alabama, he studied the iron-to-steel chain, ore from Minnesota's Mesabi, coal from Pennsylvania, limestone from Indiana, all arriving like clockwork. This precise flow over thousands of miles ran on telegraph and telephone networks Japan didn't have. In Washington, he became known for Friday poker nights with U.S. officers and intelligence men. Captain Ellis Zacharias later wrote that both sides used the table to probe doctrine, ship traits, and mindset. Yamamoto's memory for cards and odds was uncanny, but he cared more about American psychology, how they decided, how they handled pressure. Poker taught him this: Americans were bold because they could afford losses. Big bankroll, big bets. A country with depth could drop battles and keep fighting. Japan could not. One night in February 1926, after a big win, he told Zacharias, "In poker and war, the player with the most chips can wait for the right hand. Japan is betting borrowed chips against the house." His sharpest insight was about air power. While most admirals still worshipped battleships, he saw aircraft deciding sea fights. The U.S. was positioned to dominate. At Glenn L. Martin in Cleveland, he watched aircraft built on car-line principles, untrained workers, turned into plane builders in weeks. The plant produced 6 airplanes a day with powered tools and conveyors. At McCook Field in Dayton, predecessor to Wright-Patterson, he saw research muscle. More aeronautical engineers worked there than existed in all of Japan. Wind tunnels, engine labs, materials testing. Facilities Japan lacked. The figures told the tale. In 1926, U.S. firms built 186 military aircraft and 589 civil planes. Scheduled airlines already crossed the continent with mail and passengers. Japan struggled to produce 200 planes a year, often with imported engines and instruments. "Americans think in 3 dimensions," he reported to Tokyo. "While we perfect battleships, they're building the framework for aerial war, aluminum, engines, and the plant capacity to build thousands." His warnings landed with a thud. Carriers were still auxiliaries for scouting, not battle winners. In 1926, he mounted his most ambitious tour. Using diplomatic clout, he entered sites few foreigners saw. Each stop added to his proof that the U.S. could not be overmatched. At River Rouge in Dearborn, he watched fully integrated production over 2,000 acres. Iron ore by ship, coal by rail, rubber from Liberia, smelting to final assembly in one complex. 100,000 workers, a powerhouse generating 400,000 horsepower. Blast furnaces ran without pause. Lines stretched for miles. Parking lots held 25,000 cars, more than most Japanese cities owned in total. At Standard Oil's Midway refinery in New Jersey, he saw 100,000 barrels a day turned into fuel, lubricants, and chemicals. New catalytic cracking doubled gasoline yields compared to Japanese plants. "They have solved modern war's equation," he wrote. "Unlimited raw materials plus unlimited capacity plus relentless innovation equals inevitable victory. Japan has none of it." Late 1926, he went west, officially for a naval conference in San Francisco, in truth, to measure the Pacific edge. Mare Island Naval Shipyard at Vallejo could build and repair capital ships at the same time, with electrical capacity surpassing all Japanese naval bases combined. The bay bristled with forts and depots dwarfing anything in Japan. In Los Angeles, he watched the birth of the aircraft industry that would doom Japan. Douglas, only 6 years old, was already turning out advanced airplanes with stressed skin designs. 300 engineers pushed concepts Japan wouldn't field for a decade. The oil under Southern California impressed him most. The Los Angeles Basin held more than 20 major fields. Signal Hill alone had 265 wells packed like a steel forest. California pumped 230 million barrels a year, more than Japan would burn in 5 years of war. The ports told the rest. San Pedro and Long Beach grew fast with electric cranes and automated loaders. One berth could move more cargo in a day than Tokyo handled in a week. The tools for projecting power across the Pacific already existed. Returning to Japan in March 1928, he filed a 200-page report that should have killed any talk of war. It concluded that American manufacturing outclassed Japan by 10 to 20 times in every key field. U.S. oil output was 100 times Japan's consumption. U.S. steel was 12 times Japan's. Automobile mass production showed instant military conversion. American aviation was advancing so fast, Japan could never catch up. The report was stamped, archived, and largely ignored. Navy leaders focused on U.S. ship counts and dismissed the industrial analysis as not naval. The Army, busy with China, had no interest in America's capacity. Yamamoto grew isolated. His time in America made some call him too American. Coffee instead of tea, Lucky Strikes, American magazines, proof, they said, of foreign contamination. He kept speaking anyway. Lecture after lecture, article after article, Japan could not win a long war with America. The gap wasn't just quantity. It was a system that improved itself continuously. Japan, with tight resources and rigid structures, could not match that pace. By 1939, his stance put his life at risk from extremist Army officers who had already murdered moderates. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who agreed with him, moved Yamamoto to sea. Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet announced August 30, 1939, to save him. The twist was cruel. The strongest opponent of war with America now had to lead the fleet that would fight it. He understood the logic. If war came, the fleet needed its best strategist, even one who believed the war unwinnable. "I have been given the Combined Fleet," he wrote Yoshida. "It is like being asked to operate on a patient determined to take his own life. I can slow the pain, not prevent the end." In 1940, as the Tripartite Pact was debated, he warned it would drag Japan into war with the U.S. To Konoe, he was blunt. "If we fight Americans, I can give you a year, nothing after." In October, he told Navy Minister Admiral Koshiro Oikawa even more plainly, "If ordered to fight, I'll do my utmost for 6 months. I will run wild in that first half year, but I have no faith in the second or third." The supreme irony of Yamamoto's career arrived in January 1941, when he started planning the Pearl Harbor strike. The admiral, who believed Japan could not win, was tasked with finding a way to win quickly. His answer drew entirely on what he had learned in America. The U.S. weakness, he judged, was psychological, not material. Secured by oceans, Americans did not expect a blow. Strength had bred complacency. A crushing first strike, he hoped, might force negotiations before U.S. industry fully shifted to war. It was a desperate idea because Japan's situation was desperate. The Pacific Fleet had to be disabled before it could block Japan in Southeast Asia. More than that, Washington had to be convinced the fight was not worth the cost. Even as he shaped the plan, Yamamoto accepted its built-in failure, not at the moment of attack where he trusted his air crews to wreck Pearl Harbor, but in what followed, when American factories and oil would turn on like a flood. He had walked those plants. He had tallied those wells. He knew the assembly methods that could create fleets. So the raid would succeed tactically and fail strategically, exactly as he had warned. As 1941 wore on and war loomed, he tried to steady his staff with hard arithmetic. America holds 500,000 tons of oil in reserve for every ton we have. They produce hundreds of times our steel. Their plants can retool within weeks. We have already lost. Only the fighting, Hista, has not yet begun. In September 1941, at his alma mater in Nagaoka, he offered perhaps his clearest warning. Many think Americans love comfort and are shallow. That is a mistake. They have spirit, nerve, and fight. Their thinking is scientific and advanced. Lindbergh's solo Atlantic crossing is ordinary for them. He added, "Do not forget their industry is far beyond ours, and they have the oil we lack. Japan must not fight America." Students sat stunned. A national hero was telling them their country would lose a war it seemed intent on starting. To his mistress, Chio Kawai, his letters were blunter still. The government lies to the people. They call America weak and split. I have been there. I have seen their strength. We are insects declaring war on a dragon. December 7th, 1941, proved his tactical point. 8 U.S. battleships were damaged or sunk, 188 aircraft destroyed, 2,103 Americans killed. Japan lost only 29 planes, 5 midget submarines, and 64 men. Crowds filled Japanese streets cheering the Emperor's war declaration. White colonial powers, people said, would be driven from Asia at last. Aboard his flagship Nagato in Hiroshima Bay, Yamamoto read the reports silently. When his staff opened sake, he excused himself. Hours later, Chief of Staff Admiral Matome Ugaki found him staring at Pacific charts. Hollywood would later give him the line about awakening a sleeping giant, words he never uttered. His recorded comment to Agata Takeda was colder and more exact. A soldier can hardly boast of striking a sleeping enemy. Judge after you see what the enemy does, for angered and insulted, he will answer with resolve. The missing American carriers worried him. The untouched oil tanks and repair shops worried him more. He knew from U.S. port visits how fast Americans could fix damage. The wreckage looked total, but was mostly surface deep. Worse, bungling at the Japanese embassy had prevented a timely war notice. The raid came without formal warning. Americans would view it as a sneak attack. Any hope of a negotiated peace was gone. "I wanted a war fought with honor," he told Ugaki. "Instead, we sealed our fate through dishonor." Exactly as Yamamoto predicted, Japan ran wild for half a year. Victories rolled across the map: Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. By May 1942, Tokyo ruled an empire from India's doorstep to mid-Pacific. Yamamoto took no comfort. He knew these gains existed only because U.S. mobilization had not peaked. In his cabin, he kept a wall of charts showing U.S. shipbuilding. The numbers were chilling. In the first 6 months of 1942, U.S. yards launched 2 carriers, 4 cruisers, 23 destroyers, 26 submarines. And this was only the ramp-up. Once fully humming, American yards would turn out ships faster than Japan could sink them. Oil was worse. Even after seizing the Dutch East Indies, Japan could not match American flow. The U.S. could pump in a month what the captured fields made in a year. Synthetic rubber, whose American development he had studied in the 1920s, undercut Japan's hopes to choke U.S. mobility. "We are children who have stolen candy," he told operations staff. "We celebrate while the adult prepares punishment. Midway arrived on June 4, 1942, almost 6 months to the day after Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto's prophecy would now keep time. The plan, intricate and risky, reflected his urgency. Intelligence suggested perhaps 2 U.S. carriers were available. In fact, there were 3. And U.S. codebreakers had cracked Japanese signals. The collapse was swift and final. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, went down in one day. Japan could not replace them. Not the hulls, not the air groups, not the veteran deck crews. Aboard the battleship Yamato, 300 miles astern, he accepted the reports without outward reaction. When told all 4 were gone, he simply nodded. Some officers later said he looked almost relieved, as though the burden he had carried since Harvard had finally reached its awful confirmation. The American giant is fully awake, he told his staff. From here on, we fight only to delay the inevitable. The ledger proved him right. In the 18 months after Midway, America launched 17 fleet carriers and 76 escort carriers. Japan would launch 6 fleet carriers in total. The calculus he had worked out with slide rules in Cambridge now dominated the ocean. After Midway, U.S. production reached levels that would have seemed fantasy even to Yamamoto's grim math. The Colossus had not only awakened, it moved like weather. By 1943, American factories were turning out an airplane every 5 minutes, a merchant ship each day, an aircraft carrier every month, roughly 150 tanks daily, and 500,000 military trucks per year. Ford's Willow Run, unimagined when Yamamoto paced Detroit, was finishing B-24 bombers at 1 per 63 minutes. The complex itself had been built in 9 months, faster than Japan could erase a single large plant. Intelligence summaries reached Yamamoto regularly. Everything he had warned was happening, faster and bigger than even he had feared. The assembly lines he had studied now produced the tools that would wreck Japan's forces. Oil was catastrophic. In 1943, America produced about 1.7 billion barrels. Japan's strategic reserve was roughly 50 million and shrinking. U.S. submarines, built faster than Japan could replace ships, cut Japan's fuel arteries from the south. I told them about oil, he wrote in his diary. I showed the numbers. They refused belief. Now, our ships sit for lack of fuel, while American task forces roam. Through 1942 and early 1943, he commanded the combined fleet knowing the end was baked in. Letters to Chio Kawai, found after the war, show a man trapped by foresight. I am like a doctor treating a patient I have already judged terminal. I can ease pain, delay the moment, not change the outcome. The disease is industrial inferiority. It is fatal. His staff noticed his fatalism harden. He took greater personal risk, visiting exposed positions as if courting the end that would free him from leading a doomed armada. Ugaki wrote, "The commander-in-chief seems to welcome danger. He knows what we refuse to admit, that we have already lost. His burden is not command, it is prophecy kept." In March 1943, he wrote his final strategic summary. America has replaced every ship lost at Pearl Harbor, twice. They trained more pilots in a year than we have in 2 decades. Their output grows each month, while ours falls. Courage does not beat arithmetic. Arithmetic decides. On April 14, 1943, American codebreakers intercepted his inspection itinerary. Rabaul to Balale on April 18th to the minute. Operation Vengeance went forward despite the risk of revealing codebreaking. Yamamoto was unique. not just a strategist, but the one Japanese leader who truly knew American capacity. 18 P-38 Lightnings left Guadalcanal, flying wave-top low over 435 miles of open sea to arrive at the exact minute his bomber would approach Bougainville. The technology embodied everything he had warned about. Mass-produced fighters with powerful Allison engines burning Texas high-octane, guided by intelligence Japan could not match. At 9:34 a.m., his G4M Betty went down in the jungle. Searchers found him the next day, still strapped in, hand on his sword. In his pocket lay a small poem written days before. I have seen the future, and it belongs to those who build, not those who destroy. His death removed the one senior Japanese figure who fully grasped the hopelessness of Japan's position. His successor, Admiral Minechi Koga, lacked both Yamamoto's strategic clarity and his first-hand American education. The timeline Yamamoto had laid out in 1940, 6 months to a year of success, then decline, was proving exact. Every prediction born of his American travels came true. U.S. production swamped Japanese forces as he had penciled. Oil, which he called decisive, proved abundant for America and scarce for Japan. Technology, radar, code-breaking, tilted battles. Mass production replaced losses faster than Japan could score hits. Civilian plants converted to war output faster than he had even warned. By 1944, the monthly American output of war goods exceeded Japan's annual total. The River Rouge complex he had toured in the 1920s now turned out more military vehicles than all Japanese factories combined. August 1945 brought the final terrible validation. The atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the expression of American industry and science on a scale even he had not fully imagined, though he had warned about U.S. technological reach. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire wartime budget, employed 130,000 people, drew more power than whole Japanese cities, and demanded tolerances Japan could not achieve. The bombs rode B-29s that cost more than a Japanese destroyer, built in numbers Japan could never match. Captain Ellis Zacharias, Yamamoto's old poker partner, later broadcast in Japanese, "Your Admiral Yamamoto foresaw this day. He saw our plants, our oil, our laboratories. He warned you. You would not listen." The war's final tallies confirmed Yamamoto's math. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States built roughly 300,000 aircraft to Japan's 76,000, 141 carriers to Japan's 16, battleships 8 to Japan's 2, submarines 203 to 126, and merchant shipping near 34 million tons to Japan's little over 4 million. These figures were not abstractions. They were the proof of what he had seen in person, a continental engine that, once engaged, no island power dependent on imports could defeat. After surrender, occupation forces found Yamamoto's private papers, unsent letters and diaries that revealed the depth of his foresight and despair. In one unsent note to Emperor Hirohito dated December 1, 1941, he wrote, "I have failed to prevent this war. Knowing America's strength, I know we cannot prevail. Their factories can arm without limit. Their oil can fuel without limit. Their people, once aroused, will not stop short of victory. I can deliver half a year of successes. After that, mathematics rules. We are 70 million without resources fighting 130 million with resources without end. The outcome is fixed." In a letter to his intended successor, Admiral Koga, drafted days before Yamamoto's death, he warned, "You will inherit a doomed fleet, not from lack of valor, but from industrial math. Each ship we lose, they replace with 3. Each plane we shoot down, they replace with 10. Each gallon we burn brings us nearer paralysis while they swim in oil. I have seen their factories. We fight not a nation, but a continental machine. Hold as honor requires, but no defeat is certain. The sharpest irony of his story is not his death, but his life. The officer who most deeply understood American power had to lead the war against it. The admiral who believed Japan would lose had to design the blow that guaranteed that loss. The prophet who warned against rousing the giant had to swing the hammer. Friends at Harvard, learning of his role at Pearl Harbor, were shocked. Professor Theodore McNally, who taught him economics, said he knew better than anyone that Japan could not win. He had toured our steel mills, our wells, our lines. He understood mass production. For him to have planned Pearl Harbor must have been a torment. Yet within Japan's rigid command, refusal meant disgrace and abandoning his duty to limit disaster. He could not stop the war. Perhaps he could shorten it with early wins that forced talks. Post-war Japanese analysts finally gauged the scale of their blindness. Every forecast he made checked out. Admiral Somu Toyoda admitted, "Yamamoto saw what we would not." He had been to America. He knew their capacity. We dismissed him as defeatist. We believed spirit could top material. He knew spirit does not beat arithmetics. At his tribunal, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo said, "Admiral Yamamoto told us we could not win. He had studied in America. We thought him too westernized. We were wrong. He told the truth." The failure wasn't only personal. The whole military ignored the one man who had truly studied the enemy. They chose comforting myths over measured facts, mysticism over data. Paradoxically, Americans respected Yamamoto more than did many of his own. U.S. officers who had known him regretted his death even as they applauded the operation. Admiral Chester Nimitz later said Yamamoto alone among Japan's leaders fully grasped American power, our industry, and our temperament. His death was necessary but tragic. A man who knew the truth forced to act against it. Ellis Zacharias wrote the epitaph. Yamamoto was a prophet without honor at home. He saw our economic strength and warned against challenging it. He understood that modern wars are decided in factories, not on fields. His misfortune was to be too clear-sighted in a culture that prized conformity over truth. Codebreaker Edwin Layton reflected, "We killed the one Japanese leader who might have shortened the war. He knew it was lost before it began." With him gone, leadership fell to men who believed their own propaganda. The war bled on for 2 more years. In the 1970s, declassification revealed how exact his American intelligence work had been. In the 1920s, he had predicted wartime U.S. aircraft output within 10%, oil within 5%, steel within 15%, shipbuilding within 20%. He measured floor space, worker throughput, logistics efficiency, then extrapolated war potential, done with notebooks and slide rules, more accurate than many computer models. Most striking, he foresaw the Pearl Harbor paradox. In a 1940 memo, he wrote, "A surprise attack on Pearl Harbor would win tactically, but lose strategically. Americans would unite in fury. Their industry, mobilized by anger, would be unstoppable." Yamamoto's story rises above its moment. It is a warning against wishful thinking when math says otherwise. He saw the numbers. He watched the output. He did the calculations. His tragedy was not error, But truth no one wanted. In his last letter to Chio Kawai, written days before he died, he found a kind of peace. I did my duty as I understood it. I warned them based on what I saw. I spoke of factories, of oil, of endless output. They chose war. I led the fleet knowing we would lose, hoping only to blunt the ruin. History will judge whether I was right to serve a doomed cause. I could not abandon my country, even when my country abandoned reason. He closed with a haiku that captured the arc of his life. Spring rain in Texas, iron turning into doom, arithmetic defeats courage. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto died knowing his predictions would all come true. The 6 months of success he promised ran precisely from December 7, 1941 to June 4, 1942. The industrial wave he feared rose on schedule. The giant he dreaded awoke with the exact resolve he had forecast. Years in America, Harvard lectures on oil, Detroit assembly lines, Texas derricks, Washington's economic muscle, gave him perfect sight. He understood that modern war is won by production tables, not warrior verse. The factories he toured as student and attaché became the arsenals that crushed his empire. The oil fields he mapped fueled the task forces that broke his navy. The assembly lines he admired produced the bombers that burned Japan's cities. His notebooks became fulfilled prophecies. Yet his tale is not only defeat, it is also courage. The courage to speak hard truth to power. He saw what others refused to see, computed what they wouldn't count, warned what they wouldn't hear. His tragedy was not being wrong, but being exactly right. In the end, his American education taught him the harshest lesson. In industrial war, mathematics is destiny. He had done the math, inspected the means, and computed the end. Japan would rage for 6 months, then face certain defeat at the hands of an aroused industrial giant. He was correct to the day. The man who spent years in America warning of a 6-month window became history's most tragic prophet. Compelled to lead a war he knew was lost before the first shot. Killed by the very technology he had said would decide the outcome, and vindicated only by the ashes of a defeated nation. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had seen America, and he knew.